I'd like to introduce these three wonderful women. First of all, Louise Herron. Louise is the CEO of the Sydney Opera House. She's been there for 2 years now, and in coming into this position, she's the 7th CEO of the organisation, but the first woman to be taking on that role. And she's absolutely hit the ground running since starting, securing a multi-million-dollar 3-year agreement with Samsung, over $13 million commitment from the New South Wales government to fund an Opera House master plan. She's a lawyer, linguist and corporate advisor. She's had a 3-decade-long career pre-Opera House, spanning senior roles in law, business and the arts. So a very kind of extraordinary background to take on this enormous job. Rose Hiscock is the director of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences at the Powerhouse Museum, which also encompasses the Sydney Observatory and the Discovery Centre at Castle Hill. Rose has been in that position for about a year now, and again has just hit the ground at full sprint, really, bringing in enormous change to that organisation, restructuring it, revitalising the institution, reinvigorating its program, and re-engaging with its audiences through a range of very well-articulated strategies. And previous to that, she's been working in the cultural sector for over 20 years with key positions across a range of organisations, particularly the Australian Council for the Arts and Museum Victoria. And finally, McKay, who is the most recent person to take up the leadership position on this panel. You've been at as Director and CEO of the Australian Museum for 6 months now, and again, has just, absolutely been powering from the moment she came in. I think you'd been advised that you may need to take some time to gestate around, making shifts in the museum, and she's wisely chosen to ignore that advice and absolutely gun it. So she's already making huge impact with some really major projects, which I think we'll talk about a little bit further. Kim's international career is in social innovation, in marketing and communications, in project creation and management, spanning over 25 years right around the world. She's managed lots of visionary large-scale projects and also, amongst many really important achievements, co-founded Clean Up Australia and later Clean Up the World, which is just wonderful initiatives. So welcome, all three. I gather you're a rare species. It seems very normal to see all three of you up here leading organisations, institutions. Even in Australia, that's quite an unusual thing. Overseas, I gather it's very, very rare to have women leading such significant cultural institutions. I'm interested as to how you ended up here and perhaps why you chose to come here in an environment where, as leaders of these major institutions, you're so outnumbered. Can we start with you, Louise?
Thanks, Katrina. On?
Yeah, on.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I think that the three of us show that a lot of passion is required for these jobs. We certainly don't do it for the money. We do it because we love what we do. We're very passionate about achieving our objectives, and we're very collaborative. I mean, the three of us talk to each other, we work on things together, we're collaborative within our teams, and I think that makes a massive difference.
Mm-mm. Do you think there's more kind of scrutiny on you if you're a woman in this kind of leadership position?
I think that the type of director each of us are naturally means there's more scrutiny on us because we're sort of agents for change. I don't know, the gender thing, maybe not, but I think if you're pushing through this much change, then, there is going to be scrutiny. I think there's definitely, we have to do well, we really do, and I feel that really keenly, both as a woman, as a young woman, as an organisation going through change. So some of the scrutiny is the scrutiny we put on ourselves.
Mm. I mean, you were talking, Kim, and we spoke earlier that your career has been about change, about initiating new projects. Do you think that's a female characteristic?
No, I don't. I think it's not being afraid of risk and understanding that if you want to make a difference in things, sometimes you have to take calculated risks as we just heard from Tim Jarvis a minute ago. So I don't think it's a gender issue either from that perspective. I think it's very much about being prepared to put yourself on the line. And I feel that, you know, I'm very passionate about what I do. I've never gone to work for a day in my life where I haven't been passionate about what I do. And I think that's what helps carry you through the ups and downs of it. And knowing that you've got a good sense of judgment. You know, life in marketing and communications, I think, does prepare you to take on these roles, leadership roles in organisations like museums, because you've really experienced a whole gamut of things. And let's face it, museums are about communicating now. We've got to get people through the door. Louise has to get people into the Opera House as well. And so it's a very good sort of skill set, and all your experience comes together. And you've got an instinct as well as relying on a great team around you as well. But I think it's about the collective wisdom that comes together that makes you take those calculated risks and have the confidence in your ability to deliver. Mm. You know, we are about delivery. It's you know, you can't pussyfoot around. I mean, I'm the first woman at the Australian Museum in 187 years. So I walk around the buildings there and say, there's a lot of Y chromosome about these buildings. And injecting the X is great fun.
It's a fascinating time, though, isn't it? I mean, you're all kind of embarking on these programs around kind of infrastructural change, but of course, everything is changing with this kind of digital mobilised audience. The conversation is shifting. Conceptually, I mean, how are you approaching that? I mean, you have a building, a venue that is enormously visited and enormously iconic, but you know, how do you feel? How are you approaching the kind of absolutely massive change that's happening in terms of that digital engagement?
I think they go very much hand in hand, those two things, because we know that we need to renew the Opera House. It hasn't been there for 187 years, but it's worked pretty hard for the last 40 years, and there's lots of work that needs to be done. And the only way we're going to get that renewal through, both through government and through sort of public scrutiny, is if the Opera House is supported. And the only way we're going to be supported is because we attract people and because people care. So the two, to me, the whole improving the customer experience and our customer communication and renewing everything we do go completely hand in hand. You can't say you just have an infrastructure project because you won't get the funding unless you have the public support. So we need to have one eye on the renewal and the other eye on communicating with our customers. And that requires, in our case, actually stitching together everything that happens. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that the Opera House is one place made up of a whole lot of components, rather they think of the components. And we need to do a much better job of stitching the components together. And I guess on that, and sort of on the broader question, Katrina, as well, it's this, that I think we need to be very open about admitting the areas that need to be changed. And that's one thing that I think that women are prepared to do. We're prepared to say, this just isn't working, we need to do something about it.
Yeah.
I might pick up on both of those points. For us, the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, the Powerhouse Museum is in Sydney's Creative Digital Precinct. We're neighbours with UTS, the ABC, TAFE, and then in our precinct there's a whole bunch of tech startups and creative companies. So as an organisation that's about the application of, so the applied, the working, the production, we must integrate that technology into everything we do and add value to the precinct. But the other one for me, you know, we were talking about X, the chromosome X, the other's the generation. For me, this is generational change, and it's about making a museum relevant into the future and about taking a cohort, both of an audience but also staff with us to get there. And for me, that just comes down to the vision. You've got to have a fantastic vision. You have to have buy-in to your vision. And that's across stakeholders, staff, potential funders, sponsors, government, you know, wherever it comes, and just be absolutely and utterly dogged about getting there and using, you know, everything you can to achieve that. So for me, it's a combination. As Louise says, it's pulling together factors, but being very clear about where you need to go.
You know, I couldn't agree more in that our vision at the Australian Museum is that now we are the Museum of Australia and the Pacific, and that reflects our incredible collections. We're a natural history and culture museum with over 18 million objects in the collection. And as a cultural institution, we've probably been a little bit ignored, I think, for our relevance and prominence. I've got over 80 research scientists working there, doing incredible work day in, day out, and science is really at the core of everything we do. So stitching that story together, the culture and the science, is very, very important because the two are closely related and actually draw inspiration from each other there. And I think coming into an organisation with a fresh pair of eyes, and I should say I was on the board for 2 years before I was appointed into this role, but with that fresh set of eyes to see, you know, how people view our institution and how we can start to change that very dramatically and very quickly, but being very dogged about sticking to that plan. Listening to Tim earlier, you've got to have a plan. It's got to be adaptable, of course, but you must be very clear about that plan with everybody who you speak to, whether it's the team, with the staff, the stakeholders, the sponsors, with everybody who contributes, and the visitors to the museum as well. So it's an exciting time to develop a plan and implement it and start to affect change, because gaining momentum is incredibly important.
It's an interesting time too to be in charge of a museum with all those research scientists. That's all about engaging the Australian public in science, where there's a sense that scientists are being perhaps ignored, perhaps a little bit marginalised at the moment. I mean, in a way, it's quite a kind of important frontline for audience development on this kind of grand scale in engagement with that kind of area of learning, isn't it?
It is, and in the last few months we've rebranded our science research. It's now under the banner of the Australian Museum Research Institute, and we've redefined our science strategy, and we're putting science on the floor of the museum in a very engaging way. And I think that, and it's about education as well, school education, but also about lifelong learning in that sense, and all of the people who come to the museum, they're intrigued by these issues. I mean, you know, here in Australia, people are, of course, intrigued by our wildlife and want to learn about that, and we have quite a big tourism market. About 30% of our visitation are tourists, but there's more to it than that, and I'm just really excited about creating this connection between culture and science.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just pick up on this is women in charge just taking over, sorry, but just there's something that Louise said earlier that really rung true for me, and it was about transparency and making mistakes. And, you know, if we want to talk about gender, I'd be interested in your views about whether this is a gendered thing or not, but I really agree with that. I've come into our place being very open about what the issues are, open with the staff, and it's a hard thing to do without being having blame attached to it or being critical, but being very open about what the problems are, but also trialling things and making mistakes. And I'm wondering whether there's, in a funny way, there's more at stake for women because we're running organisations, but on another level, we're up for making mistakes and really admitting it. But I'm interested in whether that is a gender thing or just a style.
Go.
It's a combination, Rose. It's style and gender, I think. We've just been through this period in Australia where we had our first female Prime Minister, and she had a pretty tough time. And it doesn't matter what side of politics you're on. And history, I think, will bear that out even further. She was treated appallingly often in the media and by her colleagues in Parliament as well. So she had a tough time, but she put herself out there to do that job. And sometimes I take inspiration from that every day. Put yourself on the line to do your job and do it as best as you possibly can. I think women have been shown in every management study to have a more collaborative style, and I think that does help a bit. But we face the same challenges. We're all facing a diminution of government funding. Every organisation in the world is facing that in the cultural sector pretty much. We need to find more resources from the commercial sector to help us. We need to have more commercial operations on site. We need to attract more people. So all of these challenges come together, and it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, you have to deal with those in a way. But I think it's probably refreshing. I have a lot of female staff at the museum. If you look at the numbers who've attended this conference, for example, predominantly women at Communicating the Museum, and that's because more women work in communications and marketing. But, you know, and those young women need that inspiration. I think, Rose, you and I looked at, when we both joined the Council of Australian Museum Directors, there are 22 major museums in Australia, and only 4 of them are now run by women, and a year ago that would have been 1. So, you know, it's changing slowly, and I think we've got a duty of care almost to sort of drive that agenda somewhat through the leadership of those organisations and give young women coming up the same opportunities that obviously have been afforded to men in the past in this sector.
And on that point, I'd just like to say that I think there's another thing, that when we've all finished this job, we're going to write a book which is called Things I Can't Say. Because you have to be very aware of that all the time. I mean, yes, we are women, but for example, you know, I often think, if I was 6'2" and a rugby playing bloke, what would I be able to say now as opposed to me? And there's a big difference, and I think we need to bear that in mind very, very often, because people are very ready to put tags on us that we did that because we're a woman. And so we're always trying to say, actually, we're doing this and we're ignoring our gender, but we don't want to completely ignore our gender, hence things I can't say. And I think it all the time, hashtag things I can't say.
If only I learned to shut up. I think that's my problem.
But what about Rose when we talk?
Mine should be things I shouldn't have said.
I've learnt the hard way.
I think it is so fascinating, and I mean, that, you know, coming back to Gillard and the kind of treatment there, absolutely was around things she couldn't say, and in fact she did say, and, you know, disaster ensued. But that point around kind of collaboration is really interesting, because of course one of the obvious successes of her government was being able to get through, you know, a hung parliament, a vast amount of legislation. Can you talk a little bit more about how you approach collaboration? I mean, maybe Louise, if you want to talk about your kind of approach to sort of partnerships, and you've obviously had to build, and you're going to have to build some incredible partnerships with the ambition of your vision for the Opera House over the next decade.
Yeah. We all had the opportunity a couple of months ago to go to a session which is organised by the department that we work for, Trade and Investment. And it was a session run by Jennifer Westacott, and I think I'd been at work since about 8 o'clock that morning, and I'd been to shows 3 nights before, and I thought, do I really have to go to this thing at 6 o'clock at night? And it was raining, and I went, and it was one of the best things I've ever been to. And she said, here are my top 10 things, and her top 3, which echo also what Kim said. Her first thing was to say, know and follow your mission, don't compromise, which is just such great advice, but it also means being prepared to revise your mission. That was her first one. The second one was know your customers, which is to your point before. And the third one, which I really love, is learn and copy from the best. Don't feel as if you need to invent everything yourself. And to me, those 3 elements are really what make up collaboration. Do you know what you're on about? Do you know what the other person is on about? And are you prepared to take bits from the other person if you think that they're going to add to your end solution? So that's how I approach collaboration. And just hearing Jennifer Westacott say those 3 things, they just kind of went straight in the bank. They were fantastic.
I think also it's really important to have a mentor, no matter where you're at in your career, and to learn about collaboration from a mentor as well who's succeeded first, to take cues from them and to ask them those questions. I've been really fortunate in my life, in every role I've had, to have had a mentor, many of them men. And I say to all the young women in the audience here, you can learn a lot from men. Sometimes. And it's really important to understand other perspectives as well and be open to that. And I think that women are very good at doing that, of sort of being able to cast the net quite wide there. But collaboration at its essence, what are we talking about? If you want to get anything done, you can't do it alone. You know, if you just saw Tim Jarvis about talking about his crew and the team he put together, you can't do anything successfully alone. You have to build teams who you work with, people you can trust and rely on all the time. So it's incredibly important to collaborate because life has to be win-win. It's about friendship, and it's about being supportive of people around you and understanding that, as Louise said, they have goals and missions and purposes too, but how can you get together and the sum of the parts is a better result? And certainly in terms of the cultural institutions in Sydney, we need to collaborate more. We need to share our resources in a very positive way, and we need to cross-promote each other. The Minister mentioned that a little bit yesterday, but it's vitally important for us all now. I think rather than seeing ourselves as competitive, we have to see ourselves as part of a bigger whole, and in this wonderful city of Sydney, part of promoting a very good message to the outside and to the local community. So to me, collaboration is about that understanding, but it's about supporting other people and delivering to get that end result. And I've only ever achieved things in teams.
It's so interesting though, because that is a really radical shift from previously. I mean, you know, I'm at the ABC and, you know, that is one organisation that is the ABC, but we keep on talking about collaboration, de-siloing. You know, you had radio, you had TV, you had news, and it is actually radical how quickly we're having to change to actually start cross-pollinating. But when we do it well, and it's still, you know, in its early stages, but when we do it well, the result is so rich. Of course it is, because you're leveraging each other's resources, you're leveraging each other's audiences, you're setting up an entirely different kind of editorial proposition across multiple platforms. I mean, that must be absolutely key to an approach from a museum now.
Look, as everyone said, everything is about a collaboration on some scale. I think the conversation actually has to shift from competition to ambition. So the thing about marketers is that we're naturally competitive, and cultural institutions can be competitive, and Sydney can be competitive. But if you shift that frame to be ambitious rather than competitive, it's not mutually exclusive. Your ambition is not achieved at the detriment of someone else's. And I think that's and Sydney wants, you know, is positioned as a global city. And I'd say this to all of you know, if anyone has the ambition to be the director of an institution, that's a great thing. Ambition is fantastic. And just build the building blocks to achieve that. And I think that's the great thing about having a vision. You know, you share your vision, you're ambitious in your vision, and you collaborate to get there, and competition falls away, yet you still get to nurture that human instinct, which is to be the best. Yeah.
Can I make a comment?
You may.
I also think about that ambition and also what Kim said before. One of the big lessons that I have learnt, never having been a CEO before, is the importance of, and though I hate the phrase, the importance of taking people on the journey. Before doing this, I was a banker and a lawyer, though always with a massive interest in the performing arts. And I always thought that my role was to deliver the solution. And what I've learned in spades is that delivering the solution is not what this job is about. What this job is about is thinking of the solution and then taking input from a whole lot of people along the way, whether or not you think you need it at the time. Take the input, give the opportunity for other people to comment, welcome the, you know, open the kimono, welcome the comments, tuck it in there and move on. And that's it. It is just so much more effective.
I'd love to be at your team meetings.
I have a kimono. Can I...
Come, Kim. Kim's kimono.
Yeah, it is really kind of coincidental, I suppose, that you've all arrived at a time of really important kind of change. You've touched before about bringing people with you. Perhaps you can each talk a little bit about your particular management style and approaching this sort of radical change. You've talked about the need to be open. Do you want to get a little bit more specific about that? I mean, in the 6 months that you've come in and you've, delivering this ambition for these enormous projects to an institution that is an old, very respected, big bureaucracy, how have you approached bringing the team with you?
Well, I've tried to smile a lot. Seriously, and I mean that quite seriously to you all. I have nearly 300 staff at the Australian Museum, and they were pretty downhearted, I think, by the time I got there. And I try and smile at everybody. Customers who come in, I walk through the museum as much as I can, and I try and talk to everybody. And I just hope that through that and through demonstrating my commitment, I can guarantee you, I spend a lot of hours in that building at the moment, and they all know it. So they all know I'm putting the hard yards in and I'm rolling up my sleeves, and I wouldn't ask a single one of them to do something that I'm not doing. So it really is about trying to put a new face on what I'm doing and inject a new level of energy and commitment and spiritedness. And I mean, yes, I did a few little things when I first started there. So one of the first things I did, I think on the end of the first week, I moved out of the director's office and I took another office, and I've turned that really beautiful old historic room into a wonderful reception room for the museum, honouring a former director from the mid-1800s, a German actually, called Gerhard Kreft, who was quite a character. And, he's there was a government inquiry into him, and they tried to fire him, and all they could find him guilty of was willfully smashing a fossil jawbone and occasional drunkenness. So now after 6 months there, I haven't thrown a fossil jawbone yet, but I try and share a glass of Pinot Noir with my staff from time to time and have good conversations. But I think it's about, teamwork. And
so
I'm
did you
about
feel that was a really important symbolic gesture?
It was symbolic, and I also said to the staff that I would meet them all too, and I started directors' round tables where they could bring ideas to the table, and we got 300 great ideas for the museum in the future, and got to know people and wanted to say to the staff, your role here is as important as my role. I need to know from you, they have a great level of education, great history with the museum, great commitment. Some of it needs refreshing, of course, but valuing that contribution from them and their ideas, I think, has just been... so it's been a really interesting time to sort of give that sense of renewal and that we can actually achieve things, that things don't have to stay the same. And some things can stay the same and they're very good, but we're living in a different age now, and we're living in the digital age, which needs to be embraced as well. And so, we're out there, and as Rose said, it is about ambition for the organisation, and I'm highly ambitious for it, and and determined.
Can I just add to that? You framed this by saying it's accidental that we're all here at this moment in time, and I actually don't think it's accidental. I think I've worked most of my life in Victoria, which is a more conservative state, and I think there's something about this state at the moment that is up for change, and so we've all been brought in as agents of change. My particular style is one of transparency, firstly, with staff, which can be quite difficult when you've got very difficult things to say. Once you go on the road of transparency, you really have to stick it. You can't suddenly start hiding things. And a model of collaborative leadership. So the first thing I did was put in place a new executive team. For those of you who haven't met Michael Parry, he's in the audience now and has been part of the conference, and working in conjunction with this great team is what's made the whole thing possible.
One of the things that I've found difficult is coming into an organisation with 850 staff and trying to work out how you both respect everything that has gone before and yet change the culture. I found that really difficult within a sort of a public service unionised workforce in many areas, you know, the stagehands and so on. So it's really difficult to find that balance, and also to find the balance, as Rose says, between truthfulness and kindness. And I'm sure that Michael will talk more about kindness, but this idea of being both truthful and kind to people at the same time, and you know, they often converge, but sometimes they don't, and I find that really difficult. Someone works on a board paper and I've asked them to work on it, which is what happened today, and I look at the board paper and they have to go out and it's just not good enough, and I say, look, I'm actually not going to put it up because it's not good enough. And they say, well, thanks a lot for wasting my weekend. And I say, well, you know, just wasn't up to the standard that's required. So it's really tough. But you do have to have that clear view of, I could say, okay, well, I'll put the paper up in order to make that person happy. But in the end, they would have been absolutely slammed by the board next week, and it would have been far worse. So sometimes you do have to really be truthful, and what appears not to be kind is actually the kinder solution in the long term. So I'm not looking forward to my next interaction with that person, but I know it was the right thing to do.
Which I think goes back to one of your key learnings that we talked about earlier in the thing, your things I can't say, and how you kind of couch that. I mean, what other kind of, what's your kind of absolute key learning out of this last 2 years?
Yeah, I think my absolute key learning is the importance of taking people with you.
Yeah.
Not delivering not working by yourself to deliver a closed solution.
Yeah.
And in my case, the problem is that something that I do that I wasn't actually so aware of is that when I'm bouncing an idea off someone and I say, you know, what about if we did this? Then they think I'm saying that's what I want to do. And it's sort of taken as if that's what I intend. And sometimes I find it very difficult to frame a conversation. And now I actually say it explicitly. I say, I'm not saying we're going to do this, but I just want to explore this as a possibility. So my children always say to me, context, Mum, context. So I always think about, okay, context. Let me give you some context to this discussion.
What about for you, Rose? What's your kind of key learning?
Look, I absolutely echo Louise's point. I worked with a coach to prepare for my first day of the new role, walking in as a CEO, and one of the things she said to me that has just so stuck with me is everything you say will be amplified, and it's really true. If I sort of say, that's looking a bit scruffy, some poor person spends the whole weekend feeling terrible about the scruffy thing. So you really do have to be very conscious of what you say. For me, it is also taking people with you. But as a CEO, it's everyone. So it's your staff, your stakeholders, your family, your friends. It's a very, very broad sphere of influence, and you do need to be attuned to every one of them, and you have to seek wise counsel the whole way through.
Kim?
For me, I guess it's underscored the power of momentum. That if you can go into a role and say to people, we are going to do some things to change this organisation, but I need you to be there with me to change it. This won't happen alone. We all have to be there to do it. And of course, you're not going to get all of them. Some people look at you quite sceptically, and they're going along for the ride to see if you trip and fail. But I think getting that power of momentum for change behind you is incredibly important, and that is demonstrated by doing things and just ticking things off and saying, now we're doing this and now we're doing that. And people will come with you, they come around, they like to see it. And, we have a lot of women as well who work at the museum, and they're pretty interested in the process that's going on at the moment too, because I think they see the opportunity for that.
Yeah, just so fantastic. Louise?
Yeah, so the other one that I wanted to add is this, that sometimes you think that you're being really obvious in what you say, and you think, how could I need to say that, or do I, if I say this thing to this person, you know, thank you so much for everything you've done, I really appreciate it, it sounds fake. And someone said to me, it doesn't. See an ass, kiss it. It's a great principle.
I love it. I think we should finish on that note. I don't think we can do better than that. Thank you, Louise, Herron. Oh, Kim?
Shut us off already. Yeah. I said to them, I've never met a microphone I didn't like, so I'll keep talking. I wanted to show you something because I love telling people secrets, and the definition they say of a secret is something you only tell 3 people. So I'll pretend that there's 3 of you, and so you can't take a photograph of this, but one of the things we are doing, and I should say with the fantastic support of the New South Wales Government who backed me on this, is we're creating a new entry to the museum. We're changing its entry, and it's been where it is at the moment for 130 odd years, and we're about to build a new glass floating entry to the museum. There it is. It's designed by a wonderful architect. I won't tell you her name. Her name, get that? It's a carbon neutral structure. It's just about to come out of the DA with the City of Sydney, and hopefully it will help change the very perception and feeling of the museum by orientating us onto William Street and making it very accessible as well for our audience who visit us daily. And I think it's really going to be a good game changer. It's signalling change in a very visual way, and it's a nice way of using architecture and art to help drive that message. It's called the Crystal Hall currently. So stay tuned and you'll see it soon, but I wanted to show it to you. Now we can take it down. There we go.
Congratulations, Kim. Please, everybody, thank Kim McKay, Rose Hiscock and Louise Herron.